Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Kluczynski, live from the Eco Complex here in Burlington County. We're so glad that you're joining us live for our speakers panel. I want to introduce our two speakers for this evening, our experts here. This is Jess Niederer, who is the owner and operator of Chickadee Creek Farm, who you saw in the terrific video that we just all watched, and Meredith Melendez, who I believe is off screen and will come into the picture when I get up, who is our Rutgers Cooperative Extension County Agent in Mercer County. So ladies, I'm going to leave you be.
Thank you, Dan.
And we'll start feeding some questions to you. So, Jess, can you speak a bit to the varieties of lettuce that you're growing?
Yes, I can.
What you've had experience with that has worked and not worked for you?
Yeah, the varieties are really a big thing about winter lettuces. Almost as big as that whole moisture temperature management thing. That is more important than variety, but next to that is varieties. The ones that you saw in the video are Panisse, which gets the A++ rating for a winter lettuce. And that was the one the man at the farmer's market was shaking around. That's Panisse. The Salanova green butter was also in the high tunnel. And then Magenta, which was the red leaf lettuce in the high tunnel. One that you didn't see, but is also a really good high tunnel variety, is Adriana, and that's a butterhead. So those are the ones that I've come across and kept with and didn't kick off of our roster. But we've been through so many lettuces in the tunnels in the last 7 years. Most of the butterheads don't hack it through the winter and through the really cold environments. So most butterheads should not be played around with too much. Even if they say they're cold tolerant or winter hardy, some of those adjectives that get thrown around in seed catalogs are only cold tolerant to 25 degrees, but it's going to get so much colder than that. But the other generalization you could make about varieties is that many of the heat-tolerant varieties are also cold-tolerant varieties. So many of the Batavian-style lettuces are going to have excellent performance in winter high tunnels. They also size up quickly, and that's one of the things that you're looking for too. There's a number of lettuces that will survive the winter, but they're going to grow so slow that they're not going to do you much good. We do have lists and lists of varieties that are available online for what's recommended. And one article that I recently read in Mother Earth News by a woman named Pam Dowling lists probably 25 varieties that she's gone through that have worked for her. But you should note in that article she's talking about harvesting leaf by leaf instead of harvesting a whole head. So that is a little bit different.
Another question is, you mentioned about aphids and also disease. Do you use any IPM or other types of monitoring practices to determine if a problem is beginning to occur and then reacting to it?
So on our farm, we don't use a Rutgers IPM specialist to come out and check for things. We have 7 people working on the farm, and we touch and handle our produce every week, usually twice a week. So we are all over the place seeing everything all the time. So in terms of being able to notice a problem like aphids or a burgeoning disease issue, we're going to be hands-on with the lettuce crop, especially twice a week right now. And I would say that if you were deciding on your own operation how often you might have to check on something, it would be once a week at minimum. And if you weren't going to be harvesting thoroughly, you would want to establish some kind of grid pattern on your own for how you checked on lettuce. Though if we're specifically talking about insect problems, you're going to see issues emerging on the outside of a block. So on a high tunnel, I would especially want to look at those opening and closing sides of the tunnel, because that's where you would, or near the door, that's where you would see an insect problem first.
I'm going to continue with more kind of production questions. We'll group these that we're getting in from the various sites. The one question was, how many plantings do you get of winter lettuce per quote-unquote season?
Right. We do one planting of winter lettuce. You don't have a lot of regrowth and regeneration between the months of November and then early March. And for us on our farm, we have tomatoes or ginger in our high tunnels and all of those other months of the year. So if we were just growing lettuce, we might have that spacing a little bit different, but for us it makes the most sense to have a different profitable crop in the tunnel for all the other times. So we seed the head lettuce in the greenhouse on September 15th, and then we transplant it into the high tunnel between 1 and 1.5 months after that. And when we're direct seeding our salad mix into the high tunnels, we're doing that between October 15th and October 30th. And again, it sort of depends on when we get the ginger and the tomatoes out of that space for when we start to fill it with the winter crop.
The other questions which have come in have to do with ventilation. Do you use any fans? Mm-hmm. And then how do you determine when you are going to pull your material over the heads of lettuce inside the hoop? Like, what is that deciding factor? Temperature,
okay.
Forecast, what it might be?
All right. Do you want me to be repeating the questions? Are we good?
No, you don't have to.
Okay. No, all right, so our high tunnels, it would be really neat if we had electricity at them, but we don't. So we also don't have fans. We do try to make sure we have a ridge, not a ridge vent, but a louver type vent up at the peaks of the end walls. That really helps for airflow considerations and air circulation. If you do have access to electricity at your high tunnel location, you could both have horizontal airflow fans and you could have a thermostat based roll up side so that you wouldn't have to go out there and do it your own self, which is what we do. For the question about row cover and when we cover the plants and when we don't, if we're going to have a night, okay, this is going to have multiple parts to it. In December is pretty warm in New Jersey. If we're going to have a night that goes down to 20 degrees in December, we would use 2 layers of row cover to protect the lettuce. By the time we roll around to mid-January, for that same 20-degree night, we would only use 1 layer of row cover. And the reason is that the lettuce is going to adapt to the increasingly cold conditions. It's not as tender in January as it was in December. So you can kind of edge back on the intensive management for the cold at that point because it's going to survive, it's going to do just fine. In January, if we're falling down into the teens in terms of temperature, you still need at least 2 layers of row cover over the lettuces overnight. And probably when you get down to 12 degrees is when you need to do 3 layers of row cover. We've never had to do more than 3 layers, even if it's gotten down to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. And when I'm saying those degrees, I mean outside of the tunnel, not inside. So you can look at your weather forecast and respond to that weather forecast. Hopefully that answers that question.
There's been a lot of questions about the material with which your hoop houses are constructed of. So you mentioned about having the metal hoops, and then people are asking, what's the external material that you have? Not necessarily the remay or the stuff you're covering the crops with inside the hoop. Mm-hmm. And if you have a specific luck with any particular type of material, brand of material.
Mm-hmm. So that is just greenhouse plastic. We use 4-year greenhouse plastic, and we buy it from Nolt's Produce Supply out in Pennsylvania. We've also bought greenhouse plastic at the same time as buying the frames before. And in those cases, I know that the manufacturer was Ginnegar. They have like a little elephant logo to them. But I haven't found the need to be super picky about exactly which greenhouse film or plastic we're using, other than I do recommend going for the 4-year plastic instead of the 1-year plastic, which is a thinner mill, a lighter plastic, and it rips really easy. Even in the caterpillar tunnels, we've tried to get by with the much less expensive 1-year plastic with intentions of using it for 5 years, and that never has worked out very well. It's better to spend the extra $50 per roll and deal with something that's not going to rip if you step on it wrong or something like that. One thing to consider when you're looking at buying greenhouse plastic, you'll see that some of them say IRT next to the roll, and they're a little bit more expensive. That is not something you have to worry about with a high tunnel where you're only using one layer of plastic. The IRT plastic is for greenhouses where you're going to be using 2 layers of plastic, one right over top of the other, and using an inflation blower to put air between the 2 layers as additional insulation. So that's often more commonly done with a propagation greenhouse where you're starting your seedlings, not a high tunnel.
Jess, I'm sorry, did you answer the question about whether you use any kind of portable heaters?
I don't know if you asked me that question,
Okay.
but we don't use portable heaters.
Okay,
We haven't seen the need for it. We haven't massively killed off anything yet. It's doing okay.
some of the other questions that have come in are obviously related to the idea that your investment in the hoop house is great. And so you've got a winter lettuce crop. What else do you do with those hoop houses for the rest of the year?
Sure. So we don't just grow lettuce in the hoop houses in the winter. And that's partially because of the way that we're selling the crops. We're at farmers markets, and most of our customers are going to be pleased if we have something other than lettuce there as well. So in the winter, we're also growing spinach, we're also growing radishes, pea shoots, kale, Swiss chard, sweet salad turnips, and scallions, and tatsoi and bok choy and arugula. So we do all of that in the winter. It's basically the same growing practices and considerations as with head lettuce, though head lettuce is the most profitable of all of those ones that I mentioned. So if you're going to pick one to start with, pick the one that's going to pay off. In the other times of year, we have those high tunnels and hoop houses planted into ginger, so like ginger root. It takes forever for it to grow, and we have to charge a fairly high price in order to make that work out economically. But our customers are obsessed with the ginger, so it makes sense for us. And then we also grow tomatoes in the tunnels as well. We focus on just an early tomato crop for the tomatoes. We don't put focus into trying to make that season last very long into the fall. People actually do get sick of tomatoes.
So I'm going to slightly switch gears here and get into some questions about labor. Because a lot of questions that are coming in are asking, how many workers do you employ? Do you use equipment to do a lot of this work for seeding, et cetera, or is it hand labor? And also, a few people want to know if you'd like some apprentices so they can learn under you.
We are still hiring 1.5 people for the 2017 growing season, but I would apply fast because we just got in 5 applicants today. So labor. Our farm this coming year is going to be 12 acres of vegetables, and we have 7 people, full-time people, that are managing those 7 acres. Many of the budgets for this project in particular, for winter lettuce, is talking about like a 30 by 96 hoop house, I think. So let's just talk about that for a second. If I was going to be managing a 30 by 96 foot hoop house, I would do that myself in about 6 hours a week. I would not hire anybody for that. I would just do that part-time. All right, so if you're just talking about the winter lettuce, it's not really a lot of labor consideration involved. I would use the walk-behind rototiller on that scale. I would probably just use a 4-wheeler with a drawn-behind cart to put compost down, and I would buy a push seeder for direct seeding. You're talking about a $110 investment for that, for an earthway seeder. And I would transplant by hand. And that would sum it up. I just did it for you folks. Go on and start your lettuce farms.
No excuses.
But on our scale, especially with that new tunnel that most of the filming was done in that tunnel, we can use all of our same tractors and equipment and implements that we're using on the rest of our field production right through that tunnel. So that makes it really, really very fast to do the work, the soil prep in there. The reason we're not using our tractor-drawn transplanter for that, we are transplanting by hand instead, is because we want the head lettuce to be much more dense than that particular transplanter can manage to dibble for. Dibble means make a hole in the soil for the plant to go. And the high tunnels are expensive. So it matters if we have 4 rows versus 5 rows of head lettuce in one bed in the high tunnel. People can actually transplant by hand as opposed to on a water wheel transplanter just as fast. So it's equally as fast to just do it by walking along and putting the plants in as it is to be on a water wheel transplanter. It's just less comfortable to be walking along and doing it by hand. There's more stooping over. So, but it's not really it's not a labor losing situation, except for the tiring out factor.
Okay, I'm going to ask a few more questions that relate to production. And just so I get the rest of the other sites, we will take a break at 7 o'clock. And then later on, we will come back to the panel and we will have some more questions. So then we'll start to focus on handling food safety and marketing issues. Related to production, do you produce your own seedlings? And do you find that to be more cost effective than purchasing plugs from a purveyor?
Mm-hmm. We produce our own seedlings on our farm. I would just remind people that our farm is certified organic. So there are not a whole ton of places where we could purchase seedlings from. We're producing our own seedlings for the whole 12-acre vegetable farm. And I feel very particular about the varieties that we're working with and the planting schedule that has worked best for our marketing and our customers and needing successions for the farmers markets. 12 acres isn't actually a lot of vegetables at all. This is a small farm that we're talking about. So to have, I think in the middle of the season we have 12 different successions of head lettuce. I'm not going to be able to find a place to buy head lettuce starts from that are going to do minuscule plantings for me and the varieties that I want. So on our scale, it does not make sense to buy the starts from somebody else.
Jess, would you also maybe give us a little bit of more information about your soil amendments and your fertility program?
Sure. So when I started farming on this farm, it had a pH of 5.4 and low everything. So NPK were pretty low. Micronutrients weren't terrible, actually. But I never used lime on the ground. I just applied a lot of compost. We made compost on our farm out of municipal leaves. We would windrow them, compost them down, and then apply it at 20 tons per acre, which is a very high rate. After doing that for about 5 years, the pH was up to 6.8. Most of the nutrients were pretty good except for potassium, which had been drawn down for years from repeated soybean crops. So we still had to add some sulfate of potash to bring up the potassium. And we find that a vegetation-only based compost, so a compost that doesn't also have manures, often does not have enough nitrogen for many of the vegetable crops. So a nitrogen amendment has to be added to the compost as well. In our case, it has seemed that the most cost-effective and medium speed release nitrogen has been soybean meal. So we get that from Keystone Mills out in Pennsylvania. They have a rigorous vetting process to open an account with them, I'll warn you.
Such as?
They just want lots of trade references. Yeah, so I mean, maybe that's normal, but I don't have a business background. I started a farm business, so some of these things were bizarre seeming when they happened. So our pH took care of itself without having to add lime. In some cases and on different soil types that might not work, so don't take my word for that. Talk to your extension agent. And we also brought our organic matter up from 2.3% to 5.2%, which is a phenomenal increase in organic matter. So that does mean that our soil has like banked fertility in it now. It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Okay, we're going to take our break at this moment. So for the location here at Eco Complex and the two outside locations, or I should say outside to us, we'll take a break until 7:10, and we'll come back and we'll talk about the SWOT analysis, and then after that we'll have additional questions for the panelists.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, we are back after the SWOT analysis that was discussed and conducted at each of the sites, and we're going to continue on for the next 15 minutes with additional questions for our panelists. I want to continue with the production questions because there were a lot of them that came to me through the chat window, and a number of them have to deal with wildlife. You've got crops growing in the fields, you've got them in hoops. Do you have any problems or issues with wildlife? And then related to that, for Meredith, what food safety issues arise if there is an animal which gets into a high tunnel or in the field?
Mm-hmm. So in the high tunnels, the only animals, wildlife that we have issues with are voles. There's not, and slugs, but I think we're probably talking about furry things right now. So it's really just voles. Out in the field, we have problems with deer, with groundhogs, and anything else that lives in our ecosystem is also there. So where we have things like voles and groundhogs, we also have the predator animals that will be around as well. Yeah, but in the high tunnels, it's just the voles.
So Jess mentioned deer out in the field, and certainly the other animals as well their fecal material can pose a risk. We've had some large-scale outbreaks with human illness traced back to wildlife in the field, so we encourage growers to have risk assessments. No one knows better than you the animals that are coming on to the property, when they're coming on, what they're interested in the areas that they're getting into. So just thinking about, what's your threshold for action in terms of the fecal material or feeding damage. Certainly making sure that any workers that are out there, they understand what's a breaking point for harvest in terms of risk. And because you can't be there with them all the time to know exactly what's going on. So they need to be your eyes as well. And making sure that they're following your policies for animal intrusions out in the field.
So with winter lettuce in particular, if you see vole poop on it, you don't harvest it and sell it.
For multiple reasons,
yeah,
right?
There's a bunch of reasons why. But that's, that's all. That's like the long and the short of it, and it should be pretty common sense stuff.
One of the other production questions was, you indicated you do one planting of winter lettuces, but you have a variety, so you have your salad mix, you also have head lettuce. What do you consider to be your harvest interval? I mean, how frequently are you harvesting, and over what length of time are you harvesting?
Mm-hmm. So we have been harvesting salad mix and head lettuce from the high tunnels and hoop houses since mid-December. That is when we wrapped up with our outside field harvesting of those crops. So until mid-December, we're good to go on the stuff in the field. At the point of mid-December, we switch over to the high tunnels, both because we've planned the outside stuff to be wrapped up by then, and we've planned for the inside produce to be sized up by then. But after that point, we don't have to worry about the stuff in the tunnels going bad. In the summer when you're growing lettuce, you don't have a long harvest interval. It's gonna get bitter, it's gonna bolt, it's gonna have a lot of issues with drop or just getting too big and crowding itself out. In the winter, you don't see those same things happen. You're sizing up your crop like through to that mid-December point, and then it stops. It just stays there and stays the same size basically and doesn't grow a lot until you come to about mid-March. So by mid-March, we want to be done harvesting our head lettuce. We want to have planned our winter markets in a way that we're going to sell it all by then. Because that's around when you'll see lengthening daylight hours trigger plants to bolt and to make seed heads and get bitter and not look nice anymore. So it's the longest harvest interval you're going to get for lettuce in New Jersey.
Great. We're going to switch now to questions that related to harvest and post-harvest handling and food safety. So the first is, when you harvest, we saw in the virtual farm visit that you were cutting heads, putting them into the bins. What happens after that? Do you wash? Do you store? How long before you sell? And what about packaging? Is everything done as loose without packaging, or do you use clamshells or some other type of?
So after we harvest the head lettuce, we're harvesting it into harvest crates. We take it to our wash station, which is nothing fancy at all. It's like a tent, and then it's got some 80-gallon bins in it that we fill with water. We dump the lettuce in there and let them sit in there for probably about a half hour, and then we take them out of there and we pack them into crates that are going to market. So those are different than the crates we have out in the field. They're cleaner. We don't drag them through the dirt like we do with the field crates. When we pack the lettuce into the market crates, they have their stems pointed up. We're not worried about that milky sap anymore. That got washed off. It stopped bleeding. So we pack all of the heads stem facing up so that the water drains out through the bottom. Those crates also have some holes in them so that water doesn't sit in a pool at the bottom. We then have our lettuce in a walk-in cooler. That's how we handle our leafy greens at the farm. We will harvest up to 3 days in advance of a market if we have to, because of scheduling concerns or because of freezing temperatures. You'll remember that I emphatically said you cannot touch the lettuce when it's frozen. You really can't. You're going to ruin it all. It's a high-value crop. Don't ruin it. So if it's going to be freezing and not come above freezing for 3 days before a market, that means you have to harvest it on that 4th day before the market in order to have it. And there's you can store lettuce in the cooler and not visibly see any kind of deterioration for at least a week. And I have never gotten a complaint from a customer about head lettuce holding up. Like, nobody's ever said the head lettuce didn't hold up well. Cut lettuce. So we cut the loose leaf lettuce. We harvest it into a bin. We bring a scale out to the field with us so we can make sure we're harvesting the correct amount that we wanted, because we do sell it by the pound. We, again, dump it into the 80-gallon bins of fresh, clean water. And then we spin it dry in a salad spinner, which is really a modified washing machine on spin cycle. And then we bag it into 1 mil plastic bags that are 12 by 12. Get them from Uline. They're not fancy, they're not vented, they're not gusseted, they're not fancy in any way. And the lettuce does just fine in that. And we sell them in half-pound quantities. I'm sure pricing is going to come up. We sell winter lettuce for $3.50 a head, and the salad mix for $5 for a half-pound bag.
As a follow-up to that, Meredith, can you talk a little bit about the need for cooling the lettuce crop? So Jess, obviously, we're talking about winter production, but if you have warmer season production, what do you need to do in terms of getting that crop stabilized in terms of temperature?
Right. So temperature is probably the most important thing, particularly during the warmer parts of the year with harvest. So we said in the video, we're looking to get lettuce down to 32 degrees for storage as quickly as possible. So, within a period of an hour between harvest and starting that cooling process is ideal. So if you're not able to get it into the cooler very quickly, at least get it into the shade so it's not picking up heat from the sun. And then, of course, washing it, dunking it in those dunk tanks is a great way to remove some of that field heat as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. The other question is, you mentioned about your sales and your pricing. Someone asked the question, like, what is your amount of sales that you're doing? Like, how many heads of lettuce do you sell on an average farm,
Farmer's
day?
Market. Sure. So with our CSA pickups every week, I think we do 25 heads every week through the winter. we do an average of 2 markets a week through the winter, and I would say they sell differently one to another, but it's about 55 heads per market.
Great.
There's going to be really pretty intense variation from farmer's market to farmer's market that you're at, though. Like you would really have to check that out before assuming you're going to sell 55 heads of lettuce at a market.
You mentioned that you operate a CSA and that lettuce is just one of the crops that you harvest. Do you also market to restaurants or other retail sources?
So I wouldn't consider selling to restaurants to be retail. Like they are the retailers, but I would be the wholesaler to the restaurant. I do not do any wholesaling of our produce. So when we sell it, it's all right to the end user, to the customer. Can I say something about the budget?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so there will be a budget coming to you all, but we do a net profit analysis of the crops that we grow on our own farm. So for our own net profit analysis of head lettuce, we spend 95 cents per head to sell it. So that means we are making $2.55 per head when we sell it. And that's like this fantastical ratio of profit that you don't get with too many farm crops. So I just wanted to say, like, you do have to put up a high tunnel and all, like that's expensive stuff, but it's also, it really works out in terms of a calculation at the end of the day.
I want to go back to a few of the production questions that came in. So in the video, you talked a lot about your concerns about disease, and that we all know that disease occurs because we have a host plant that the disease is willing or able to get into and cause a problem. We also have the problem child, the disease itself, and we have conditions, and you talked about moisture a lot.
Yeah.
Can you talk about any experience you've had where you've had a significant infection or infestation of something, and how you dealt with that, and what does that mean in a permanent high tunnel circumstance?
Sure. So because we grow a lot of different things through the winter, it does mean that where we have lettuce right now, we won't have lettuce at least next year. And for many of our crops, we really want a 3-year rotation away from the same crop family. And we don't quite get that in the high tunnels, but we can usually at least finagle a full gap year between overlapping lettuce with lettuce. So the theory there is that we're cutting down on the soil base for any of those diseases to stay alive, to have the inoculant there. Not that it really matters because we're a vegetable farm and we're small, so the inoculant is like everywhere on the farm, and every time the wind blows, everything's getting inoculated. So that comes down to moisture, because you don't get a plant disease unless the plant is wet at the time that the disease inoculant touches the plant. Like you usually need numerous hours of a wet plant surface for that plant to get the disease. So that's why I emphasized moisture constantly. If you don't have the plant be wet, then it is not going to get sick. And in the early years of the farm, I think I was just like really exhausted from working all the time, that it was harder to come to the farm promptly all throughout the winter every day that needed the tunnels opened and closed and row cover taken on and off. I think there was just some time where I was so burnt out that the idea of taking the row cover off the lettuce, that was just not freaking gonna happen. But that is when the lettuce died, because it really is important that the crop can air out and dry off. So yes, I have killed the lettuce. But the lettuce really doesn't die if it gets the chance to dry out. So if you really do open and close the doors when they should be open and closed, and take off the row cover when it doesn't need to be there, the lettuce will not die. But yeah, you'll kill the lettuce if you leave the row cover on and if you don't open the doors.
Another question which was very popular earlier and I missed was about harvesting. You showed in the video that you hand harvest using a knife. Are there other methods that you use, and how have those worked out, or is it nothing better than the ability to go out there, inspect the crop, hand pick what you want to harvest, and slip a knife in and you're done?
I think that's the way people harvest lettuce, like everywhere. So I'm like head lettuce, at least. I haven't seen mechanical harvesting of head lettuce, even on very large scales. Head lettuce is harvested with
I'm in agreement
knives.
with you.
Yeah. So like that's the way to do it. Yeah.
I'm a soybean expert, so I apologize.
No, it's okay.
You're becoming a lettuce expert.
But the question was asked, and so I think it's a good one to make
Oh,
sure.
sure.
that
Yeah,
people
you just need a
understand.
knife.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's nice if it's a sharp, clean knife.
In terms of the post-harvest handling again, you talked about taking your bins and dumping them, or putting them into the large drum. What other, or maybe for Meredith too, like what are the wash station protocols? What should someone have as a basic setup in order to make sure that they are handling the produce appropriately?
So in terms of post-harvest handling with the cleaning and the packing and getting it into storage, we want to focus on any water that you're using post-harvest and making sure that it's been tested and that the results are 0 generic E. coli. And that will keep you in compliance with any potential inspections or audits that you might have in your future. And it also ensures that water coming into your packing area is quality water. There are certainly sanitizers available for growers to use to help keep that water clean. When you're adding sanitizers to dunk tanks and wash water, you're just keeping the water clean. You're not sanitizing the produce that goes through it. So sanitizers are a great way to take what could be a small problem and prevent it from becoming a large problem. And we've seen this in some high-profile accounts with produce in the past. We also think about the surfaces that the produce is coming in contact with that lettuce. So you want to make sure your harvest bins and anything that's a solid surface that's coming into contact with that is in good repair, so it's not doing damage to your crop. And that it can be cleaned and sanitized as well, because human pathogens, as well as pathogens that'll become a post-harvest issue in storage and transport, they can reside on those surfaces. So wood is something that can't be sanitized. It's a splinter concern and can get rough and do damage to a crop. So if you're using wood in the packing house now, you can just cover that with linoleum. That's a nice smooth surface. It's cheap and easy enough to sanitize. And so I think that covers the basics of it. And yes, washing machines, we do see those in use, and just I think taking it apart is a good idea.
Meredith stumbled
on
our farm while I was taking apart a washing machine to clean it all away, because there's you should take it apart as much as you can before using it. So there's a lot of plastic crap in there that's not necessary for spinning lettuce dry. Yeah. That's all got to come out so that it can be completely cleaned down. And I would also just say that in our wash station, we try to make sure that everything we use has the opportunity to completely dry when we're done with it. So we don't leave water in the bins. We don't even leave the bins right side up. Like, they get turned over so that they can dry out. The washing machine gets sprayed down and scrubbed down, and the lid is left open so it can dry out. Because again, a lot of pathogens life needs water. So if you take away the water, like you're gonna come a long way in just keeping things neat and clean. One other consideration for the harvesting and safety and stuff, you're working with knives and you're working with hands and fingers, and you're gonna cut yourself eventually. Even if you're pretty good with knives and you've been doing it for a long time, somebody will ask you a question right as you were slicing a head of lettuce. So if you bleed on the produce, you don't sell it. And having supplies for your crew to put a Band-Aid on, but then also put latex or nitrile gloves on after that happens. So if people get cuts on their fingers, you have to wear gloves. Like, you have to have isolation between blood and produce, because the cuts are going to happen. So having those supplies on hand so that everybody who's working with you knows where they are, they're in a consistent place, it's in the same place in every truck or in the same place in every building, stuff like that.
Accessibility is good.
Yeah. And communication.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm going to take this time to thank both Jess and Meredith for their time here on the panel. I think they've offered a lot of great information, answered a lot of questions. We also want to remind everyone that there are resources in the packets that they've received before the event and also this evening. There are fact sheets on the food handling and safety issues, which will be formalized with publication and up on the website. And as Jess mentioned, there will also be the crop budget. So we look for that information to enhance what you've learned this evening. So thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And there's a round of applause here in the Eco Complex. I just want to also mention, while the off-sites are getting the evaluations handed out, that Meredith indicated in the video that Rutgers Cooperative Extension hosts a number of food safety training sessions. Those are available, the information on those are available from our website. So if you go to the alternate crop website that we provided with you earlier tonight, you can find a calendar of events which deal with this food safety and handling training. And more information, I think, really needs to be known about. It's good for you to invest the time and energy because there are so many standards now required in order to handle produce, sell it. If you are organic, you certainly need to be able to show that you are having a facility and using practices which meet the requirements. And also, we've got HACCP and other types of federal standards which also require a lot of information to know how to handle produce once it is harvested. So with that, I'm going to instruct you all about the evaluation that we will be conducting on the program. As I mentioned at my site and probably at the other sites, we've received funding from the USDA to support these programs, and one of the things that they've asked us to do is to evaluate the program and ask you as a participant to help us do so. So what you all should have in front of you is a copy of our evaluation form. And there are 2 pages here, which everyone should see. The first is an information sheet. It's a cover letter, and this is called a consent form. This is required by federal human subjects research to inform you all that you are being asked to participate in a study and that your information is going to be used for certain purposes, primarily for us to report back to our funder and also to publish any information that we have about what people thought of the program and what they've learned and what they plan to do with the information that they got at these sessions. So the consent form is rather lengthy, but I do need to point out to you that I am running this study, and if you have any questions about it, my contact information appears on the back page. And you'll be asked to answer 6 questions, and that survey you can tear free from that cover sheet, right? And then what we were asking you to do is to make sure that you put your name at the top. What we will do is we're comparing that to the enrollment records so that we know at which location people attended. The information on your personal information, your name, will be removed from the data that we then summarize. So there's no way that we'll be able to connect you with the information you've provided. And the questions ask you a number of things about, are you currently farming the crop or not? What knowledge you had after you've attended the session and what knowledge you now think you had before you attended. So make sure that question 2, you're looking at that correctly. We're asking you, what did you learn after you've attended the session, and then asking, what did you know before you attended it? On the second side of the evaluation, we ask whether you plan to attend future sessions or to review the material that we've presented online. And lastly, we ask you to rate the quality of the presenters, the session itself, what value it had to you. And finally, there are 2 questions that we ask which are not required to be answered, but we would like to know because USDA is asking, how many years of farming have you been involved in, and how do you identify your gender? That would also help us to determine whether we're meeting a female audience, which the USDA considers to be a minority audience. So if there's any questions about the evaluation, you can ask those providing assistance at your site. You can then just pass them down the row and we'll collect them. And with that, I would like to sign off from the Eco Complex. Thank you all for your attendance and your attention this evening. We hope that you will attend our next session, which will be held in March on specialty peppers. And we encourage you to be in contact with us, look at our website, and gather more information as you plan for expanding your crop repertoire with winter lettuce. Thank you very much.